Hi, everybody. Hi, Chanda Smith Baker.
Hello.
Sorry for the tardiness, folks who are joining us tonight. We had a few technical difficulties, but we're ready to roll now. So thank you for joining tonight's episode of Voice, Vision, Value, Woman Crush Wednesday with our special guest, my hero, and the chick I want to grow up to be like, Chanda Smith Baker, Chief Impact Officer and Senior Vice President of the Minneapolis Foundation. Welcome, Chanda.
Thank you, Toya.
We're going to talk tonight about picking up on a conversation I guess we started 2 years ago about doing philanthropy different. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay.
And, you know, we've got some folks here viewing with us. So I want to encourage folks to put your questions and comments in the chat. Any questions you have for Chanda or for me, we will do our best to get to them over the next hour that we'll be together. But, you know, before we get started, just want to see how you're doing today. How's your heart?
I think it's good.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's always a mixed bag to ask that question, right?
There's a lot.
Or it seems like more regularly, right? So what I would say is that I am choosing to be grateful every day.
Yeah. That's a good way to be. That's a good way to be. So what was your day like? What'd you do today?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the navigation is real, right? And so I think what I love about being in philanthropy, and you know, you and I have talked about it. I came from leading a multi-service nonprofit where you could literally go from being in a conversation around facility liability to a staffing issue to speaking about an issue in community, and then coming back and doing a one-on-one with someone who is experiencing challenges, right? Like the range of the conversations that you're in on a daily basis can be so vast. Mm-hmm. And so having practices to remain present in it, you know, the practice of remembering, because people will pick up a conversation where they left off and you've had like 400 of them since.
Yep.
So today was sort of a series of conversations where I was picking up where I left off and like reminding me how far we've been, how much further we have to go in terms of the work that we've set out to do in our strategic plan. It was an opportunity to reconnect with some of my staff because I haven't been into the office for a couple of weeks. So I got to see them in person. So there was lots of the in-between time that you get that is just so beneficial when you're in person. So that's sort of what my day was, with the range of topics that went from here to here.
Yeah. And now you're here in another conversation. Hopefully this is your last conversation of the day.
We'll see. I mean, I like you, so it's all good.
All right. I like you. So how long have you been in now? 4 years?
4 years. It'll be 5 years in September.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier coming from being CEO of a community nonprofit organization and stepping into philanthropy. What would you say has surprised you most about this work?
Well, you know, I mean, I shared with you that, you know, part of what I was thinking is that I was moving into a role that was perhaps less demanding or had less stress. Mm-hmm. And I would say my discovery has been that that's not necessarily the case. It might look a little bit different.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there is an opportunity and a weight of having the point of view that we have in philanthropy. You know, there's lots of audiences, there's lots of people, you know, I'm from the community, I live in community, I'm all about community. And if I could, I would make everyone's wildest dreams come true. Mm-hmm. And I just can't do that. And so it is stressful trying to meet the expectations that I rightfully have from community, while also trying to align all the decisions with the strategy and all the things that we know that we have to align to in the parameters that we're given. So, you know, I think I've been surprised at how stressful it is in some places. And then I think I've been surprised at how generous people can be, the opportunity for learning and the generosity around that.
Yeah, yeah. So Channing just put on the screen the recent sort of spotlight on you from Essence magazine, where you talk very, very, I think, candidly about your experience working in philanthropy and your commitment to community. Um, and there's a question that says like, who is Chanda, right? And you use a lot of words to describe yourself, responsibilities and sort of roles that you play as a woman, as a mother, as a daughter. But the two that struck me, um, you described yourself as a learner and a student. And so, what are some things that you've had to unlearn in your time in philanthropy, and are there things you've had to relearn?
That's a good question. I mean, I think my learning orientation has always been oriented towards over preparing and getting as many perspectives as I can. So one of the examples that I've used is like there's strategies that we wanted to move in the neighborhood that I'm from, and that, you know, I've done numerous focus groups, and I'm always surprised I'm always surprised by an insight that I get from it. And I think that that's the one thing that I both learn and unlearn all the time, is that no matter how proximate I think I am, there's always a way to get more proximate and to find ways to amplify areas that I may be less familiar with. You know, I think, you know, being in philanthropy on the other side of the work, you're like, they just don't get it, right? Like they just don't know. And so now when people do that, they're like, I know way more than they think I know, right? Like, and sometimes you just can't get to everything you want to get to. So I think the learning and unlearning is a complicated question, because I think that there are things about what does it mean to be a Black woman leader? What does it mean to be in roles that you're conditioned to understand how they operate? And I had to unlearn that so that I could learn what my best self is in these roles. So I've had to unlearn sort of my own professional pathway and the ways in which I was acting into other people's leadership and leaving pieces of my own, you know, on the floor. And I need to pick mine up, right? Yeah. And really hold it and honor the purpose and the path that's been laid out for me. And so there's a lot of learning and unlearning just in that.
Yeah. So Channing, can you put the Essence spread up again, please? Because I just want to sort of hold this moment for that experience and sort of talk about it a little bit more. You know, I am, like so many folks from our community, right, grew up with the Essence magazine every month in the mailbox or on the porch, and reading things that there was no way for me to understand at 10, 11, 12 years old, but just read it and thought I knew what I was thinking and reading about. And so for you to, at this point in your career and in your life and in your, you know, sort of existence as a Black woman in the world today, to have an opportunity to share your story and perspective in such a iconic and meaningful publication in our community. Can you talk about what that was like for you, and how you prepared yourself for that? Talking about being over prepared, or like, how do you prepare to be in Essence magazine and talk about philanthropy and your leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's these moments where you realize your life has prepared you for a moment, like the manifestation of what is taking place. Like, you know, the process from like, I'm going to be interviewed to interview was like this short, right? So I'm glad for that, because I think I would have overanalyzed it or been trying to be perfect in response, right? Like unlearn versus being authentic in my response, which is what you see in that article. And then there's a 45-minute interview that accompanies that's on their website. And what I will say is Um, you know, those were the magazines, Ebony, Essence, Jet, right? Like we grew up on that, and there were, some other ones, but those are the ones that were the most reflective of us. And then you go into like a social sector, and then there's Black Enterprise, and there's other magazines and publications that really lift up, in my mind, right, in my imagination, or in my reality, folks that are working in corporations, people that are entrepreneurs, but not so much the social entrepreneur, not so much the ones, right, like you get an unsung hero recognition, in those magazines, but not necessarily to me on the same level as those. And so I felt very good to have the sector and my work sort of being on display, that the social sector, the social entrepreneur is valuable to all of our communities, and to how we thrive or not thrive in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our communities. And so that felt really great to be able to do. On a personal level, I use the word manifestation. It feels like you go through seasons and you have questions, right? Like Zora Neale Harrison talks about, there's years that question, there's years that have answers.
Yeah.
And, coming through 2020, like there's just a whole lot of questions. And I think, to be able to have that at this moment, to inspire, to understand, to be seen, was what my spirit needed. And I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you talked about like you feel like you were prepared for that experience, right? So how were you prepared when you think about your leadership and the experiences and opportunities that you've had long before, Essence Magazine, the foundation, the podcast? What are some examples of ways in which you were nurtured so that you could step into those moments when they were presented to you?
Yeah, I mean, my mother passed away in 2020, and before she would pass away, we'd be in these conversations, and she would always say, like, I came out the room, like, why? Like, I was the why kid. Like, why can't I? Why can't, why is it like this? Why is the sky blue? Why can't everybody eat? Why is that person on the sidewalk? Like, why is that parent yelling at the kid? Right? Like, I think I was just insatiable in that way. And I was looking back at some things that I wrote in high school recently where, my goal was to like basically solve homelessness and to like make sure everybody could eat, sort of thing, right? So I think that in my family, we have a lot of people that contribute back to community. And as a matter of that, we were always in conversations and raised to believe, my sister and I and my cousins and everyone, raised to believe that the world did not revolve around us. Mm-hmm. And that our responsibility was to give where you're rooted, right? A community is a place that you invest in, not move from. And that's both, like, I've taken it from a very literal sense, but they're like, even if I moved, I'd be here.
Yeah.
And there's people that move and still don't relate. And that's just not my experience. And that's not how I was raised. So I think that foundationally, that was very important. I think the second thing was, my mom constantly saying, I know that's what other people think. I know that's something you think you should say. I want to know what you're feeling right now. Like just the encouragement of me leading and leaning into my full voice. Again, very foundational. And then I think more practically along the journey was a moment in 2020, not 2020. Oh my gosh, 2000. I'm old, I think. Anyway, in 2000, when I was applying for a role at the organization that I ultimately led. And it was a role that required a degree. And I was sort of out here, I was in survival mode. And I remember saying to her, I think you're asking for someone that can do the job. I can do the job. If you want them to also have a degree, like, let me know, right? Like, I'm prepared to do the work. And I know that I can accomplish this at a high level. And you have to decide if this degree is something that is going to be a requirement that would hinder me from doing that. Ultimately, they took a risk on me. And so when I think about that opportunity that ultimately led me from going from that moment to being the CEO, 11 years later, it's really quite remarkable. And it's because I met along the journey people that believed in my leadership and allowed me to flourish into it by not eliminating me from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a result of that, it's something that I try to move forward.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you move it forward, right? In your demonstration of leadership and how you support and nurture others in ways that are in the modeling of what was offered to you. How do you lead from that place of nurturing and support and
I think you froze at the end, but I think I got it. I would say that I listen and I watch the people that are around me, and I try to make myself as available as I can. Like there's a number of days and hours in the week that can be challenging, but if there are people that work with me, around me, or whatever, like if they are expressing that they are interested in opportunity or whatever, I try to make myself available, because Toya, I remember asking people, can I shadow you? Can I learn more? And not feeling like I could infiltrate that when I was really hungry for it. And I don't want to make people feel that way, right? Like I want to be able to meet that. I have tangible examples of Adair Mosley, who came on when I became CEO, and he was my executive assistant, and he was very, very talented. He quickly moved to chief of staff, chief of innovation. Mm-hmm. And then when I left, he's now the CEO. Or Antonio Cardona, that started, and he was working with me, and now he's a senior leader. And I can name a number of people like that. And I hope that they have been able to move. And in some cases, I know that they've been able to lean into that. The same reason I was is because I opened up the door, saw their potential, and allowed them to lean into it in a way that matched their path and their way of getting to the same end that we agreed to, versus trying to impose my leadership on them. And so I've had some good success stories around that in partnership with them. And in return, I've gotten a lot from it. And I think it's developed my leadership even further. And I've had some that haven't worked, right? But I've had some that worked.
Well, one that works, and one that has worked and continues to work is in connection with your award-winning podcast, Conversations with Chanda.
Yeah.
So recently, your producer, Sue Pak, was honored when she received an award from a communications association. And
it was from a staffing organization. Yep.
So there's that. So she's now on the cover of a magazine. Like, so you're in Essence and Sue Pak is on the cover.
Yeah, let's just be clear. I did not make the cover of Essence. That was Cardi B. That was Cardi and her family.
But so here's Sue Pak. But I'm talking about before this, right? Didn't she receive an award and they flew her out? So like she's now an award. The podcast is an award-winning production, and Sue Pak is an award-winning producer, and she's on the cover of Staffing Success magazine. But can you talk a little bit about what you saw in Sue Pak that opened up the opportunity for the talents that had not been tapped to?
Yeah, I love her, right? Like I just absolutely adore her. And she came into the foundation as a temp staff. So she was a temp receptionist. And she was one of the folks where you would walk in and your hands would be loaded and she would ask, can she help? Or, she'd bring you something to drink. Like she was just jumping in all the time, right? Like I felt her presence. It wasn't like she came in high and head down and like doing her work. Like I felt her presence. I felt her spirit. And she was just very warm. And so I started coming in, and I would chat with her more and more when I would come in and when I had 5 minutes here and there. And so one day I was coming in, and I might have been, sitting in one of the conference rooms near it. And I heard her on the phone talking to her wife, Jamie. And they are starting a business as a couple. And I heard her talking about it, and I heard her talking about producing something. And so I came out and I said, we've got this podcast going. I heard you. Would you ever have any interest in maybe listening to an episode and seeing what you would do in terms of production? So she said, well, I've never done that, but yeah, I'm curious about it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to email you one. And if you ever have a spare moment, I would like to see what you might do to improve on it, or to add what you think should be in this podcast. And so I believe it was that night or that next morning where she sent it back. And I remember going, okay, Supak, like, let's see what else you got, right? So I would give these little things, and every time she's like, well, I spent the last 48 hours reading about it, and then I called this person and I did this. And so that's how it evolved. She was, a temp receptionist, to then hired her basically part-time on contract while she was still doing the temp work at the front desk, to now she's full-time sort of managing the guests front to back end, helping with everything and producing. And she starts all the podcasts. And one day I listened to myself and I'm like, okay, she done opened this up and she sounds fantastic. And so that's a real example where just a tremendous amount of mutual respect. And what I would say about it is, what I appreciate about all the people that I mentioned is they're not yes people, right? Like I appreciate people that are like, it's good, Chanda, but you can be better. Supak is good, Chanda, it could be better person, right? And then we can like laugh about it and go round and round, and she's mostly always right. And I think the mutual relationship and contribution has just really been really delightful.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story, because I think, this idea of doing philanthropy, like this is our job, but being sort of in a headspace where you are recognizing people's humanity and connecting to that in ways that are meaningful and can open up opportunities that you never would know are available if you don't make space and time. And so it's sort of moving through the work at every opportunity you have, in recognition that everybody has more to give. Everybody has room to grow. Everybody is curious about something. And if we stay mindful of that, you can tap in ways that will just sort of lead to award-winning podcast series and magazine covers. Like, who would have ever imagined?
I know, right? I mean,
and if you think about, and I will, the podcast had developed in a traditional way, there would have been a job description for an experienced producer with a degree, and all of these things that we tell ourselves are required to produce excellence, when sometimes all that's required is opening the door, holding a space at the table, creating the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one of the conversations we get into a lot, and you probably know this is true in philanthropy and other organizations, particularly small places, where staff will say, I don't know what the pathway to promote, like, I don't know what the other opportunities available to me are.
Yeah.
And, my response is always like, 30% of them probably aren't even in the minds of any of us right now, right? Like, you have to lean into possibility. Some of them are created because of growth, right? Some of them are created because of opportunity. Someone leaves and then there's an opportunity to move in. But in most of the cases, it's real clear conversations where you are saying, like, I'm interested in more. This is what it looks like. You're leaning into work that might be out of scope, that allows people to see your potential differently. And so I think there's lots of ways to move into inspiring work. If we open not only the door for other people, but but how you see the possibility in your own work life.
Mhm,
And I think
mhm.
being able to open that up, because I didn't envision having a podcast. I did not envision that.
Well, what did you envision? Like, where did that come from?
It evolved from a conversation that was a little bit like, we should have, a meeting in the foundation and talk about like education and economic development and some of those types of issues. And I'm like, yeah, we could, right? Like, we could, like, I feel like I do that, right? Like and so interacting with people and them saying, well, what is your strength? Right? Like you're naturally curious, right? Like I'm the why kid. Like I'm the same way as an adult. Like why we gotta do it that way?
I know.
And I know, why for a come, right? Like that's me. And so, I want to explore the possibilities. Like I'm a reader. I read all the time. So how do you bring the strengths and things that I already do in terms of my curiosity, my reading? How do we move it into something? I wasn't interested at all in being on video, like radio podcast made sense. And I was more interested in talking about what undergirds all of the disparities around racism, around wealth, around privilege, around issues like criminal justice, where people are landing on all sides. I want to be in the conversations that are emergent, that are necessary, and I want to hear about them from multiple points of view. And so that's how we landed there at the foundation.
And this podcast is sponsored by the Minneapolis Foundation, correct? It is a programmatic element of the foundation where you are sort of, having very provocative conversations, sometimes borderline controversial. And this is all happening in a philanthropic institution, right? And so again, doing philanthropy differently, how has that impacted the philanthropic strategy of the foundation, or has it, the things that are emerging from the podcast, the issues that are being raised, the response that you have from your viewers that are not just local, it's listened to in how many countries?
9.
In 9 countries, right? Like, so how has this podcast impacted grant making or philanthropic strategy, or has it?
I mean, I think that it has. I mean, it's done a couple of things. One is, I think, presenting the conversations from a community, like broadly, like urban community, Black community, communities of color's points of view. I think what happens is that those conversations make philanthropy accessible, or at least the conversations accessible to those that maybe didn't see the Minneapolis Foundation as a place for them. Bringing in guests like one of the Central Park Five, or bringing in, Kevin Reese, who spent time in prison and came out, and now he's, doing wonderful, innovative things in our community. It opens up the conversations to communities that have not been engaged. And then I think from our donor community, it allows them to expand sort of their points of view on issues and hear about things differently. And it's a safe way to do it. You can do it as you're walking around the lake, or you can do it while you're cleaning up, right? And examples of how that has shown up is, I remember getting a message on LinkedIn, and it was basically like, look, I'm white, I'm privileged, I'm a privileged woman, I'm white, I have wealth, and I didn't see myself in the Minneapolis Foundation. And I've been listening to these conversations, and I'm really interested in getting more involved in giving resources to these types of issues. And thinking, wow, I don't know if I expected that. Or people that said, man, I was really, I listened to your conversation with Robin DiAngelo, and I don't think I've ever been in a conversation where I understood more my privilege. And I invited my neighbors over, and we sat around and we discussed it and we cried about it. And I grew so much in this. Like, do you have book recommendations? You have, like, my curiosity around this. My growth is prime. And I think and then the other thing is the number of people that suggest guests. From staff to donors to community. Like, I'm constantly getting like a text message, like, you should have this person, I think they're dope. to, I would really like to hear about this environmental issue, right? And so it gives a platform for us as a foundation, as a team, to learn and hear. It's a bit of a feedback loop that is incredibly important to our overall strategies.
And so one last question about the podcast, particularly as it relates to strategy and the sort of feedback that you're getting from folks. How do you see it evolving? Like, do you have ideas about where you take it from here, or is where it is, where it should be, and where you see it being for a while?
That's a good question, because I do think I'm at a bit of a place where I want to see where it goes next, just so that I continue to stay interested. It's a lot of work, right? I do at least 2 a month. It has recently expanded to a community radio station here in the Twin Cities that has an online medium for those outside, but it's on the radio now on Sundays and Thursdays. So there's conversations that I'm going to begin to have there that may not go on the podcast more broadly, but that will be aired locally, because there's some very talented people that are doing wonderful things in our community. And some of it is so local, I don't know if it would be as relevant broadly, but I want to honor and uplift some of the great work that's happening. And so I think that's one place that we'll go next. They're pushing me to do video content, so I'll probably go there. I think that there's places that we can add research and some other elements into it to just bring it up a notch.
So I want to sort of shift gears a little bit to the honoring and the uplift of Black women in philanthropy. So when you and I met back in 2017, I was in the process of developing a book about Black women, or the idea of creating a book about Black women in the sector. And so fast forward to now, Voice Vision Value exists as an online platform, and the book is now under development. When I met you, you were not working in philanthropy.
No,
you were not. But again, right, sort of like where opportunity, the moment and opportunity meet. And so here we are having this conversation. You're now in the sector, you've been here 4 years, and you, along with 8 other women across the country, have agreed to serve as co-curators for this book project. And the project will uplift networks of Black women in 10 regions around the country. And the Twin Cities is one of those regions. And you recently hosted a mixer for the book project. And so we've done this in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and New Orleans. And the energy, the enthusiasm, the excitement in the Twin Cities has been really, really phenomenal to sort of witness from afar. So can you talk about this sort of moment of celebration and uplift of Black women through this project, but also how it is creating some energy around the collective presence of Black women in the field in your region?
Yeah, and I think you said in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and New Orleans, and I think you mean DC, because you were in DC.
No, so we were in DC. We did the Woman Crush Wednesday
Got you.
episode live in DC, and then the next week we did the book mixer in New Orleans, and then you did it in Minneapolis the weekend.
I got it. So what I would say is, yes. So we had a phenomenal response to the survey that you asked, right? Like Voice Vision Value sends out a survey to get perspectives. Like, I think we were very responsive in the Twin Cities to filling that out. It could speak to a number of things, right? Like the lack of opportunity for us to really lean in and say what our experiences are in a safe place, the excitement about the project, like there's, the connection to each other. There's so many ways that could go. Minneapolis has been ground zero in so many ways to a number of very high profile police murders. And so it's been isolating for sure. And so we had the event, Toya, it was so great. Just even planning and preparing for it and getting all the feedback for it. And then once we were there, it was very much like, oh my God, so-and-so should be here. Oh my goodness, why isn't this person here? Like, when you do the next one, let's do this. So I definitely moved into it thinking, I'm doing this thing because I said I would for Toya and Voice Vision Value. And now I think I'm enlisted to like keep us convening. And it speaks to the need for us to have spaces that are psychologically safe, mm-hmm. that are reinforcing to the brilliance that we have, that are acknowledging what we're navigating, places that lift our spirit, that support us professionally, that stand in the gap, that amplify when we're not in the room. And that's what I hope that I can continue to hold in that space for the women that participated, to continue to gather and to pay attention to their work, right? Not to just be heads down, but what are the ways in which I can amplify, connect, and convene, using this as a kickoff. And there's certainly lots of energy around it.
Yeah, you all, I mean, your region has two, there are many women who have contributed to the field, but there's three actually that come to mind. One, Dr. Retha Clark King, who I met way back in the day. Just so brilliant, so gracious, so accessible. And I had no idea how big her presence and contribution, not just to philanthropy, but to,
the sciences.
Of science. Yeah, right. And then you have Wenda Weeks Moore, who, was one of the first Black women trustees at Kellogg Foundation, and who has just left such a legacy of brilliance and contribution and strategic leadership. And she's just broken through so many of those glass ceilings. And then the other person I would say is Karen Kelly Arula, who she was the first person I remember who brought her children to philanthropic conferences, and her two sons. Mm-hmm. And when my son was young and I could take him out of school, or, when he was in preschool, I would bring him with me because I knew it was okay, because I watched Karen do it for years. And I often think about having a conversation with her, like, right, like what did it mean to have your boys in those spaces? How, or if it has informed, right, their sort of thinking and participation in community in ways that can be tied back to them sitting at a JJL lecture at 12 years old.
Right.
Well, but those are women that you swim in the waters.
I swim in the waters. I stand on the shoulders, right? Yeah. Like, I'm inspired by their leadership. Like, it moved me in ways that they will never fully understand. Karen Kelly attended my church. Her son, Solomon, just graduated from Yale Law School. So shout out for that. I just saw that posted on social media. What I would say about Karen is she was the person that I went to church and I sat behind her. And then I would get distracted and I would be like sort of watching her and thinking like, whatever she does, I'd love to do. Yeah. And she was at the Minneapolis Foundation. I basically have her job. It looks very different than how she had it, but I have her job. I have the role that I used to sort of envision, like, who is this lady? I kind of want to do that, whatever she's doing, that I can't.
Like, I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is, but I know I want to do it. And so that's her. And I think, being able to navigate space and I think now being in it, I have more of an appreciation for what she was navigating. Dr. Retha, I just saw her. She's getting recognized next week on the 25th Humphrey Leadership Award for her contribution. I always say, I think she's got like 3 PhDs. Right. She worked for NASA. She's done all this incredible work. And I remember a story of her talking about being young and trying to pay for school and going across the Mason-Dixon line to New York to come back to the segregated South. And so to think about her in her 80s, I believe she is, in her latter years, right, coming from a segregated South, the fear of traveling through those states, right, the tenacity it took, the dedication to break all the odds, to go into the sciences, to be impactful. She sits on and sat on, I don't know how many corporate board seats. And she is definitely a person where, she is a rocket scientist, actually, right? And just so gracious. And that when you talk to her, like, you feel like she's seeing your whole self, right? And then Wenda, who came in and navigating board leadership and being such a tremendous leader in our city, and just walking through space, sort of commanding, right, to be seen, being able to facilitate the leadership and opportunities for so many, including the Wenda Weeks More internship at the Women's Foundation. And so when I think about their leadership and I think about the opportunities that we have, right, that there is still so much room for us to inspire in the way that they did. There's so much room for us to think bigger, and to see possibilities and lean into possibilities that just don't exist yet. And I feel like we're on the cusp of that.
Yeah. And so when you think about those women, when you think about your leadership, you've talked about, Adair as your successor at Pillsbury. You've talked about supporting Supak. Within the context of supporting Black women's leadership, right? Like, why? What is uniquely important and significant about that? And as someone coming into philanthropy, you're very well connected now, but is there something you wish you had when you came into the field? And does that exist now? Right.
I don't know exactly how to answer that. But what I will say is that I do think, and I've talked about how, I spent time in a retreat with you, Black women's retreat, the week before I started, right? Like, to me, that's an ideal way of starting because, I got an introduction, right? I had an opportunity to hear and feel more networked than I did when I got the job in this particular field. And I think that was really impactful. And even if I had met no one else, just the invitation itself, I think was reassuring. It's hard to make those changes, even if you're as confident or whatever, you're still coming in. It's still like the first day of school. You're still trying to figure out where things are. And so I think, thinking about how do we smartly and culturally invite people into this field when they come in, right? I think I said to you at one point, like, all of the emerging, like the new leaders in philanthropy are like, I don't think they're my age. I think they're younger. So where's the one for like the older people? And I remember feeling that way. Like, I'm not emergent necessarily in my leadership, right? I'm coming from being a CEO, but I am new into the field. And so where can I sort of get grounded and test and understand more globally what is happening? I also think that we have to continue to push because we are not in competition with each other. There's enough room for everyone. And so that's what I think the brilliance of what you're doing and the gatherings are doing, right? Like, we're better because of us. And so how do we continue to be in space and know that there is plenty of room for everyone to shine? Because I think that sometimes we're raised and it's always like there's one or few of us, so we're sometimes can be positioning against, but just collectively, when we just link up, we're just so much stronger. And then I think the other one I might say is like access and the listing of Black women executive coaches that are familiar with the challenges, right? Because I can articulate better what I've had to navigate now than I could when I was going through it.
Got you. Do you have a coach now?
I have coaches. And I say that because there are people, like I have a sister circle that I'll go when I talk to. You're in that, right? That allow me to gain perspective. I have had coaches over the years for different things. And so I would say formally, I do actually have one. Do I think that coach gets to everything I need? No, I don't. But do I feel like in my network I can get to it? I do.
So I got no questions in the chat, but I'm getting questions on my phone.
Okay.
So someone wants to know, if you weren't doing this, what do you think you would be doing?
I would be doing this differently, right? Like, I was recently in a conversation where, I see my work, and I got this clarity when I had a conversation with Pra on the podcast that leads Nexus Community. And it's that I don't necessarily see a career. I have a vocation. From when I was little, I wanted to give back into community. I could always see myself as making an impact in community. And I sort of define my role is like my purpose, my role is to create the conditions for people to be successful. Like I see that as my contribution. And I would do that wherever I went. And right now, one of the places in which I do that is the Minneapolis Foundation. I serve on boards, and I give back to my community in a number of ways. And so I don't see myself not being in a place of working to make community better.
Okay. How do you teach your children about philanthropy? And I think because you're from North Minneapolis, that's where you live, that's where you've built your career, that's where you've raised your family, and now you're leading, at the foundation. So philanthropy is sort of woven into philanthropy and service, right? So how does that show up in your family?
Yeah. So let's just play. I just got the baton from like my mother and my uncle and other people that have provided service. My uncle was the first Black superintendent in the Twin Cities in New York. And there's a lot I learned from that, and folks in education and other public service. So I'm just the next baton, and I have that baton now to my kids. I think it's no different than what you said about Karen, like bringing them to meetings and having them understand, raising them with the level of consciousness of what's happening and what are the issues facing the community, and how do you critically think about them, and how are you not victim to circumstances, and how are you contributors to solutions. I think is just part of the DNA of how we operate as a family. More concretely, I mean, I have 5 kids, and my stepdaughter, like I'm very proud of how everyone leans in the community. They do it very differently. My oldest son is all about his family, and he's, got his daughter in sports, and he's living into that vision for his life, and taking care of that in a very, very responsible way, him and his wife. And then my son Malik is working right in the sector. So like I'm interacting with him all the time, because of his commitment to community, and he lives it probably more out loud in obvious ways. And then my daughter, like from little, was like giving like parts of her money back to like, issues related to cancer and health. And, she was making annual contributions of $100 or whatever when she was like 12, and very committed to doing so because of things that she was aware of. And so, again, I have to nurture their love for community, how they see it, because it would be like, you should go into it this way. But all of them embody a commitment to others in a way that I'm so proud of.
And I think what you've described, and thank you, Lisa, for that question via text, because I think what you just described is, again, a love for community and humanity that is sort of breathed into your family across generations. And philanthropy right now is the job that you do at the Minneapolis Foundation, but the representation of commitment and service and philanthropic offerings through time, talent, and treasure is deeply embedded in everything that um, you do, and that your family as a collective unit, how it exists and operates as part of
Yeah.
a community.
I think that's right. And like, let's also be clear, like over the last 2 years, like this hybrid work environment or like working from home, like they didn't know what I did. Like they didn't know what I did. They knew that I cared for other people and did stuff. Right. Like, right. They want to know why I'm not returning their texts while they're in class or whatever. Right. And so now they're like, oh, I see what you do now. I get it. I actually can witness it in a very different way.
Yeah.
And so I think they're more clear. And I think that, that's going to be hopefully one of the blessings of this moment is that people in families have an opportunity to see their relatives in a new light and how they show up every day in class and work and community because we've been so captive.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier, and this will be my last question, before the questions I always ask all guests.
Uh-oh.
Um, you mentioned earlier that, right, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities have been on the front lines around so many issues, police killings and the deaths of unarmed citizens. Um, the trial of the officers who were complicit and culpable in the murder of George Floyd. Um, eh, what do you want folks to know about the city right now, given all that we've witnessed, but you're living it every day. Your family is living it every day. Your team at the foundation is living it every day. Your colleagues and community. What do you want people to know about the state of Minneapolis?
Hmm. How would I answer that? I mean, right now, anywhere could be Minneapolis. And
Mm,
so it's a cautionary tale. Um, how could progressive Minneapolis, right? Like the place where we are always number one as a charitable state, where all the Fortune 100s and 500s, there's so many here, like there's lakes down the block, right? Like how does this progressive place become known for what it's been known for over the last several years? Is a question that everyone continues to wrestle with. I think the tendency is to run in and find solutions quickly. And we know the quick fix is not the long haul solution.
mhm,
And so trying to find ways to temper. There are so many obvious problems and there's so much obvious potential and things that are just completely brilliant that's happening in our city that don't get sort of the same spotlight. And I don't mean just nationally, I mean even here, right? Like you tend to look at problems and not the possibilities. You want to solve the problem, but you don't have a vision for what's possible. And I think that we are still trying to vision what's possible. We have an understanding of what we need to stop doing,
mhm,
but
mhm.
I think we're still in the visioning of what's possible here. We are tired, right? Like I think that was indicative of the conversations that we were having with Black women, Black people, people of color. I think people are just exhausted, not just because of the work, but because of the weight,
Mhm.
because of the fear, because of trying to navigate so many responsibilities and stakeholders around what is happening. I believe wholeheartedly in the leadership's desire to make it different.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we got to get to a place where we have the infrastructure and the long haul commitment to continue to be honest, and that Black death shouldn't have to occur for cities to be honest.
Yeah.
Right? Black and brown deaths should not be the catalytic moment for people to do better when they already know that there's problems. Right. And so what people need to know is like they should do what we did.
Yeah.
Right. Like you need to get ahead of it, and that there's conversations that need to be bolder. And Toya, I remember watching the witnesses during the trial of Derek Chauvin, and the young people that were leaning in very boldly and the things that were happening. And I'm thinking, wow, and looking at what was happening during that time period in our city and saying, man, am I being bold enough even in my workplace? Am I being bold enough at the tables? Like, I'm witnessing stuff on a regular basis that are like little assaults that add up. And so what let me examine my own boldness. Let me examine my own stick with itness. Let me examine what my role is right now in this moment to lead even more into uncomfortable places and spaces, so that hopefully those little acts become more often for more of us, so that it doesn't culminate in ways that we've seen and witnessed, but that we can nip it in the bud and actually make the type of systemic change that is required to prevent more of that from happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Chanda. Thank you. And I think what you've described that needs to happen in Minneapolis, and the fact that you describe it as a cautionary tale, is so poignant, because we are all in a very vulnerable and fragile place right now, where Black death, the death of people of color, it continues to occur.
It continues. We just seen it, and we've got George Floyd's the date of his death is coming up next week. And so how do we honor him and others by continuing to be bold towards our towards justice, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we always end with this question: voice, vision, value. Which word resonates with you most, and why?
Voice, vision, value. I think I think right now I'm in a vision place. I think the word, like, different times, like I'm in a place now, my youngest kid is getting ready to graduate. So like how you vision life without day-to-day, responsibilities around children is one thing. A little bit of what we just said, like now that I have this experience behind me, now that I have some wisdom, now that I have doors open for those that are coming in behind me, like what is the vision for how I continue to act into that on a daily basis? And then what is the vision for what I do next?
Yeah. That's it. Stop. Nothing else coming after what I do next.
What I do next. There's more to go. And I want a vision for what happens next. You're funny, but yeah, nope, that's it. It's a period.
Period. That's the sentence. Well, thank you so much for making the time and for being such a great demonstration of community leadership, and bringing community with you into this work, and being in community as part of this work, right? It's a both and. You're bringing community in the room, and then you are showing up in community as a representative, as a part of, and not in proximity to. So thank you for sticking and staying. Minneapolis needs you, and they deserve so many more of you. So
I appreciate it, Toya. I'm really proud of the work that you're doing. And, I had an opportunity to witness sort of the impact of your leadership in a circle conversation that we recently had. And it's really quite remarkable. And I think there's a lot of us out there. And I think, when we see each other, I think it just continues to inspire and give sort of the fuel for the next day. And so I appreciate this. I appreciate the format and the opportunity to be with you as you launch the book. And I can't wait to see the finished product.
Yeah, launch the book, and then what you and Black women in the Twin Cities are going to do as a result of coming together in connection with the project. It sounds like some more good trouble will be bubbling up.
Good trouble. That's what it's all about.
All right. Thank you.
Right. Yep. Take care. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yep. You too.
Good night, everybody. See you next month.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.